I had a little interaction with someone on Facebook the other day. This person I know that lives relatively close to me that's really trying to like he what he's doing is he's trying to like stick it in my face that Biden won, blah blah blah. And what I said to him is I was like, "Listen, like I don't know why you're so happy about this because A, you're a white man, which means you're at the bottom of the totem pole. And B, guess what? Some of the policies that Biden has already told us that he's going to enact is going to directly lead to your children being taught to hate you." And people think I'm exaggerating when I say that this is what's going on in the schools, that they are actively, I mean, it starts in high school now, but I've seen schools that are integrating it into the middle school and elementary school curriculum. The schools are starting to actively teach white children or even mixed race children, to be honest, because I was in a teacher training just the other day. I watched a teacher training that was conducted via Zoom, and they literally said that mixed race children should only identify with the non-white part of themselves because the white part of themselves is privileged. Whatever. They're literally teaching white kids, mixed race kids, to hate themselves and to hate their parents. And that is not an exaggeration of what's going on. It's to varying different degrees depending on the school district. But of course, he didn't believe me. People don't believe me usually when I tell them that this is going on in the schools, but I've seen the curriculum, dude. I've seen the curriculums that are starting to get infused into schools, and we have people like Chris Rufo, who himself is married to a woman of color and has mixed race children and has pulled them out of public schools because of it. We have Chris Rufo to thank for giving us additional insight into what's going on in at least one public school in the bustling metropolis, the bustling woke metropolis, I should say, of Seattle, where they have just reconstituted another autonomous zone. Seattle is truly one of my favorite cities ever, and I'm so disappointed. It's like all the cities that I really like to travel to have been destroyed by this woke nonsense. Minneapolis, awesome city. I loved Minneapolis. Great food, great beer. Not anymore. Seattle, same thing. Portland, Portland was never one of my favorite cities, but like it was okay. It was kind of cool, kind of quirky. Nope, I can't even go to Portland now. But this is the result of the woke nonsense. So we are going to read through this thread from Chris Rufo and talk about his findings, what's going on in the Seattle public schools. And if you think what we're going to look at is only going on in Seattle, dude, if you have kids, you better know what they're learning. You better pay attention because this is going on all over the place. He just happens to be based out of the Pacific Northwest, and so that tends to be where he focuses on. So we're going to take a look at this thread, but before we do that, folks, I do daily content around news, politics, culture, really focusing more so on the culture, woke, social justice stuff at the moment, but whatever topic I find interesting, I try to post at least one video a day, sometimes 2 or 3, depending on how spicy I'm feeling. If you enjoy the content that I put out, please consider subscribing to the channel. YouTube has made it very, very difficult for people like me to grow our channels. I was growing at a clip until like the end of August when the wall came down and YouTube started really, really, really screwing with my channel. I'm not a victim here. I'm also not the only one this is happening to. But if you want to support people like me, please make sure you're subscribed. Please make sure turning on those notifications, giving the video a thumbs up, leaving a comment, sharing it out. All those things really, 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 really help me out, and I greatly appreciate it. All right, let's take a look at what Chris Rufo found. And by the way, if you're on Twitter, and I'm not really looking at Twitter except for very specific people at the moment. I know I always show stuff on Twitter. I have very specific people I look at on Twitter because Twitter's kind of crazy. But if you are on Twitter, Chris Rufo is one of the people that you definitely want to follow. He is at Real Chris Rufo. He is a nice, sane person in the land of Twitter, and he sends stuff out like this all the time. He does really interesting threads. So make sure you're following him on Twitter. I will link to all of this in the description below. Scoop. Seattle public schools tell teachers that the education system is guilty of spirit murder against black children and that white teachers must bankrupt their privilege in acknowledgement of their thieved inheritance. Let's review the whistleblower documents. In this one, the trainers begin by claiming that teachers are colonizers of Native Americans' ancestral lands and that the United States was built off of the stolen labor of kidnapped and enslaved Black people's work, which created profits that created our nation. Now, I do think it's interesting. So the focus for the woke mob for almost the entire year has been solely on Black people, on African Americans, right? That's really where the majority of their focus was, except for the very beginning of the year when the pandemic was first starting. Listen, if you're new to all this woke social justice stuff, there is an absolute hierarchy in terms of oppression. And Black, like the darker your skin, the higher you are in the hierarchy. Black people way up at the top of their hierarchy. Black women, really high up. Black trans women at the very top of the woke hierarchy of oppression. But African Americans in general, they view as the most oppressed people. It's where a lot of their focus has been, which is why you see Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter all over the place. But at the beginning of the year during the pandemic, when Trump was talking about the virus coming from China, like they started to actually focus on Asians. And this was a new thing because Asians are typically very, very oppressed in the hierarchy. In fact, they've kind of forgotten about it now. The Asian thing being higher up in the, they rose like a good 6 or 7 notches in the hierarchy, but not really anymore. In fact, there are articles coming out right now that basically say that Asians are basically the same as white people, which I really wouldn't be pleased about if I was an Asian. But what they're saying is they work hard, they get really good grades. They basically assimilated to whiteness. I'm not making this stuff up. I'm not, I swear. So Asians were up there for a little while and then they sank back down. And then Black people, really when George Floyd died, that was when the focus on Asians stopped. They focused on African Americans for most of the year. By the way, this really pissed off Latinos. So if you were surprised that Trump won Florida, this really pissed off Latinos and especially Cubans, man. Cubans understand this stuff. So the focus was there. And now, apparently, I've actually seen an uptick. I think this is really interesting. Since the election, I've seen an uptick in the focus on Native Americans. We saw it. I did a video just the other day about a high school removing Abraham Lincoln's name off of the high school. They said in the headline it was because he didn't think Black Lives Mattered, but what they really were talking about is his treatment of Native Americans during his presidency. So maybe there's been an uptick. Native Americans are working their way up the hierarchy. All right, let's see. Yes, this one right here. We would like to acknowledge that we are on ancestral lands in the traditional territories of the Puget Sound Coast / people, because there's always got to be a land acknowledgement. You always have to acknowledge that when you're doing woke training. We want to recognize that the United States has been built off of the stolen land of kidnapped African and enslaved Black people's work, which created the profits that have created the nation. Of course, they never really talk about how not all Americans were involved in slavery, only actually a very specific, very small class of people in the South were involved, but apparently that doesn't matter. We also recognize the brown labor currently happening in California and across the country. They are working under terrible air quality conditions with wildfires burning over 1.2 million acres of land, in addition to the pandemic, to pick strawberries for your smoothies. This is in schools. This is being taught in schools. I can't even. This is literal activism in the schools. The participants identified themselves by both gender pronouns and race labels. While it became commonplace in academia to use gender pronoun identifiers, this is perhaps the first example of an institution creating the expectation for explicit race labeling in the workplace. One might argue this might actually even end up being discriminatory, but okay. So we have the creative team here. The very first things that people care about is not this is in the workplace, dude. Not what their area of expertise is, not what their passion is. No, pronouns, race, and then where we teach after that, because these are they care about such superficial things when it comes to classifying people, because all that really matters is your gender identity, your race, and then tangentially where you work in this example. The trainers tell white teachers that they must commit to the journey of anti-whiteness, even if their lizard brain, we're going to talk about what that is in a second, makes them afraid that they will have to talk about sensitive issues such as race, racism, classism, sexism, and any other kind of ism. Oh, so they actually really don't know even what they're referring to when it comes to lizard brain. Okay, so we've got a couple quotes here. You can never take yourself out of the equation. You must commit to the journey. This means we each must do the inside-out work required, developing the right mindset, engaging in self-reflection, checking out our implicit biases, practicing social emotional awareness, and holding an inquiry stance regarding the impact of our interactions with students. And then we have this next one. As you begin your inside-out work in this area, your lizard brain will start to freak out. What she's referring to is the sympathetic nervous system. Basically, okay, so the way our brain makes decisions, for our purposes here, you split our brain into 3 different parts: old brain, midbrain, new brain. This is the analogy I've always used to explain it. It tends to be one of the easier ways to grok this. The old part of the brain was the very first part of our brain to develop. That's why a lot of people refer to it as the lizard brain. And it's basically the primary concern of our old brain is our survival. It's survival, purely survival. And it's interested usually in 3 things: food, shelter, and sex. And essentially like survival, procreation of the species. So our old brain is kind of constantly keeping an eye out on things and looking for anything that might impact our survival. It is the primary decision maker of the brain. Then we have the midbrain, which is all about the emotional part of the brain, emotional decision making. Actually, most of our decisions end up getting made in the midbrain because most of our day-to-day decisions have nothing to do with survival at all. Like, probably actually this stuff actually has nothing to do with survival, which is why I say that she doesn't really understand what she's talking about, but that's okay. And then lastly, we have the new brain, which is about logic and reason and data and evidence and all that good stuff. New brain is actually not, as much as the people on the right like to say that the left makes decisions emotionally, they make decisions rationally. The reality is that the new brain, where we process logic and reason, is actually a very weak part of the brain in terms of overall decision making. Anyway, what she's saying here is that if you start to contend with issues relating to race, your survival mechanism is going to go off. It's a sympathetic nervous system. It's basically our fight or flight. Anytime we perceive that we are in actual danger, our fight or flight, or sometimes freeze, people include in it as well, starts to light up like a Christmas tree, which means we're either getting ready to aggressively fight the situation, really quickly run away from the situation, or we just stop and we don't do anything out of sheer fear. That's the freeze part of it. I don't usually include that in there, but whatever, some people do. So that's what she's saying is happening, except that talks about race do not directly impact our survival. It doesn't. I'm sorry. Like, sitting through an uncomfortable workshop does not activate the survival mechanism. It may activate the annoyance mechanism. It's going to activate many things in the midbrain. People are going to be annoyed. People are going to be frustrated. People are going to be aggravated that they're having to sit through a training with someone telling them that they're racist. But it is probably not going to activate your lizard brain, which is your survival mechanism. Like, the lizard brain is the thing that gets activated, like when someone's chasing you with a knife, or when, you almost get into a car accident and you had to slam on the brake really quickly, or like things like that actually impact your survival. So she doesn't know what she's talking about. Her credibility is ruined. But let's read the rest of this quote anyway. I'm talking like really fast today. I feel like I'm like Ben Shapiro or something. Man, I'm fired up. I haven't used Twitter for almost a whole week. I haven't looked at Twitter and I'm feeling good. Like, what a difference like 4 days of not looking at Twitter makes. It's afraid that you will have to talk about sensitive issues such as, referring to our lizard brain, it's afraid that you will have to talk about sensitive issues such as race, racism, classism, sexism, and any kind of ism. It is afraid that this conversation will make you vulnerable and open to some type of emotional or physical attack. No, that's generally not how it works. But this fear is not real. It is just your amygdala's ploy to get you to stay in your comfort zone. No, she is wrong. This is a brainwashing technique that people like this use to try to convince you that the only reason that you're annoyed at being called racist, or frustrated at being called racist, or angry at being called racist, this is what they do to try to get you to basically put your emotion, like suppress your very valid angry emotions. This is what they're doing. This is a brainwashing technique to get you to say, I'm not really feeling the anger that I think I'm feeling for you calling me a racist for this entire workshop. I'm not really doing that. This is just it's just my survival mechanism. No. No. If you are having emotions like that, emotions, try to follow. I'm being condescending towards you, but I'm almost, I feel like I'm talking to her, right? Emotions are a completely different part of the brain than what she's referring to as the lizard brain. Completely different part of the brain. If you are feeling anger, frustration, stress, anxiety, depression, all these other things, that is a completely different part of the brain. So if she doesn't know what she's talking about, congratulations. So glad the Seattle Public Schools are investing in her. The central message is that white teachers must recognize that they are assigned considerable power and privilege because of their possession of white skin. To atone for this guilt, they must bankrupt their privilege in acknowledgement of their thieved inheritance. Balancing power. Bullet point 1, we need to be mindful about our power and privilege in racial relationships. 2, whiteness, the centrality of whiteness, and the possession of white skin. The possession of white skin. Why do they always refer to bodies and like the possession of skin as something separate from the? It's crazy. Whiteness, the centrality of whiteness, and possession of white skin are assigned considerable power and privilege in our society. The group that has the greatest power or privilege ultimately has the greatest responsibility to the relationships. I mean, I think I'm a little bit, I tend to think that every person is responsible for at least 50% of every part of every relationship they have. That's just me. That to me seems a very equitable way to go about the world, is to say that I'm responsible for 50% of our relationship and you are responsible for 50% of our relationship. That seems much more equitable to me. Self-reflection and self-interrogation are critical. Self in relationship to other, SIRO, if you experience marginalization, part of your responsibility is to take care of yourself, practice self-empathy, and centering the importance of your feelings. Isn't this ironic? That she's essentially telling people who possess white skin, you need to deny who you are and really work to reduce your whiteness. And she's telling people who do not possess white skin, honey, you need to take care of yourself. You need to practice self-love and self-empathy. White people are not deserving of self-love and empathy in this person's world, but everyone who is not white, honey, take care of yourself. Treat yourself right. Love yourself. Everyone, by the way, everyone deserves to love themselves. Everyone deserves to practice self-empathy. Just so we're absolutely clear on where I stand on this, I don't care what the color of your skin is. You should treat yourself well. Love yourself. Love every part of yourself. Your strengths, your weaknesses, things you do really well, the things you suck at, all that stuff. Everyone should love themselves. It should not be dependent on what skin you own. Next, the teachers hold a discussion about spirit murder. This is a new term for me. I don't know what this term is, so I'm excited to find out. Which, according to Dr. Bettina Love, is the concept that American schools murder the souls of Black children every day through systemic institutionalization, anti-Black, state-sanctioned violence. All right. Building community, spirit murder, Black excellence, focus on social justice in the classroom. Seattle Public Schools icon right down here. The media would like to portray these incidents as isolated, the work of a few racist, overzealous, culturally insensitive school officials. Instead, I want to draw attention to how school officials like Gorduck and Fields, regardless of their race, gender, or ethnicity, spirit murder. Love 2013. The souls of Black children every day through systemic, institutionalized, anti-Black, state-sanctioned violence. The intangible violence towards Black children is less visceral and seemingly less tragic than the physical acts of murder at the hands of white mobs, kidnapping and killing by the white self-appointed vigilant. What in the holy hell is this person talking about? If a white mob took over any school and murdered black children, I think that would be on the news. I'm just saying. I think that would be on the news. I'm pretty sure that would be on the news. Has anyone ever heard of that happening recently? I haven't. The goal of this program is to transform public schools into activist organizations. At the end, teachers must explain how they will practice anti-racist pedagogy, address current social justice movements taking place, and become anti-racist outside of the classroom. To know who you are is at the heart of SEL. How are you anti-racist outside of the classroom? In what ways are you practicing anti-racist pedagogy? What are some of the community orgs and resources supporting your students? How do you talk about the current social justice movements taking place? Again, remember, this is for teachers. This is for teachers teaching in public school. How do you talk about the current social justice movements taking place? With one or two of your identities in mind, what triggers you? How are you vulnerable with your students? As if teachers have a response. Dude, teachers should not be being vulnerable with their students. P.S. What are you willing to sacrifice to ensure student voices are heard? Bankrupt your privilege. An active, I'm sure, very self-loving, empathetic self-reflection. What are you willing to risk for racial justice as an educator? What would bankrupting your privilege look like for you in classroom practice? They're literally having them develop a plan on how to do this in the classroom with their students. What is getting in your way? What are you afraid of? Referring to feelings from Rachel Contracts. Who do you want to be when the morning light finds you, especially as an anti-racist educator? Maybe they don't want to be an anti-racist educator when the morning light finds them. I'm just saying. What immediate step can you take to be that person tomorrow? See what they're doing. These are, oh, dude, this is so nefarious. These are things that you do when you're in coaching relationships. You have people visualize the person they want to be. Think about what that person would do. Just start acting like that person. This is like I do these things in coaching relationships, but it's like one of these things where they're using it for such goddamn nefarious purposes. This pisses me off when people take techniques that are supposed to be used to help people to feel good about themselves, to help them achieve their goals, to help them create the lives they want, and they use it instead to try to brainwash people into hating themselves, into believing that they're horrible people, and into indoctrinating students with this absurd ideology. This is evil. This is straight evil. This is no different than I compare this a lot to like Scientology. And there are good Scientologists, whatever. I'm not a fan. I'm not necessarily a fan of Scientology, but like whatever. There are good people in it that, you know, I don't want to demonize everyone that does it. But the reality is that the way Scientology sucks people into their little cult is it starts off with good things. It starts off with helpful things that L. Ron Hubbard did not invent, by the way. Like, it's like ancient wisdom that he appropriated and used for his own purposes, but it does work for a reason, right? It makes people feel good. It makes people feel like they're making a difference. It makes people feel like they're moving towards their goals, whatever. And then once you get them in using the good stuff, then you start teaching them all the nonsense. Stuff like this is no different than indoctrinating people into a cult. That's why it gets so into people's brains so easily. In recent years, the district has expanded its Department of Racial Equity Advancement and deployed racial equality teams in dozens of schools. The stated goal is to advance educational racial equality, but in practice, this program often serves to enforce an ideological agenda. Oh, good. Congratulations, taxpayers of Seattle. You're already paying for this. Look at that. Look at all of the schools. Look, pre-K through 8, elementary school, elementary school, elementary school, elementary school, some high schools too. I told you. They're starting this in elementary school. Literally starting it in elementary school in Seattle. This is mind-boggling. Seattle's public schools like to claim they are teaching tolerance, but in truth, they're teaching hate. And then he's got his full analysis in the New York Post, which again, I will link to this entire Twitter thread. I'll also link to that New York Post article because I know not all of you are on Twitter, so you can check it out for yourself. And then I definitely do want to encourage you to support Chris Rufo, support his work if you have the resources to do it. It's really, really important. His website is christopherrufo.com, and he is just an absolute rock star, absolute champion in getting word out about this crazy, crazy nonsense in education. And it's something, again, that I'm going to be focusing on much more moving forward. I'm actually going to be integrating a lot of this stuff into the book that I'm working on. It's just, listen, I don't care what Biden does in the really depressing reality in which he gets inaugurated as president. This is the most important thing we need to worry about. What is going on in the schools? Because this started before Donald Trump. It's going to continue after him, regardless of when that may be. And this is the most clear and present danger that our culture has to deal with for right now. So that's all I've got for this time around. I hope you enjoyed this. I'll see you soon.